All right. Well, thank you all for joining us today. We do ask that you stay muted. You can put all the questions in the chat as we go, and we will answer those as they come up. I'm Jennifer Smith from the Michigan Association of School Boards, your Director of Government Relations. And with me today is DeShondre Bedenfield, our Assistant Director of Government Relations, and she will be assisting with the questions, with links that need to go in the chat, things like that. And then our co-presenter is Bob Dwan from the Michigan School Business Officials. He's got the numbers, I've got the policy, and hopefully we'll be able to get through this and answer all of your questions. We are recording this, so it'll be available to anyone who can join us, hopefully by the end of the week. So our goal today is to talk about the state budget. It was signed last week by the governor, and there were no line item vetoes for the school aid section. There also was no tax cut included, which is what we had heard was holding up the budget, was how big and how much and where are we cutting taxes. That discussion was dropped in order to get the budget done, but a large amount of money was left on both the general fund and school aid fund balance sheets. So that conversation is going to continue throughout the upcoming months, because there is still quite the appetite for some sort of tax cut because we have so much money. Some of you have heard me say this before, but we continue to urge caution as they look at things like this, because while we have a lot of money today, that may not be here tomorrow. And a lot of the surpluses we've seen are being artificially driven by the federal relief funds, by high gas prices, and by the economic activity that those relief funds created. But as people go back to doing things instead of buying things, you're going to see the sales tax go down. Their revenues go down. So we just want them to keep in mind that anything they do today affects all the years in the future. So we continue to urge caution on the idea of a tax cut. We would rather see that money spent that's on the sheet, spent for our students and in the classrooms where it belongs. So that's going to be an ongoing conversation as we move forward. But I'm going to turn it over to Bob to get us started on the budget. And as I said, if you have questions, please put them in the chat and we will ask them as we go. Bob, you're up.
All right, thanks, Jen. Appreciate it. Bob Dwan here from MSBO. I guess by title, I'm the Deputy Executive Director. And I actually have a badge at the office because they thought that was funny. So that's even better. Thanks for joining us today. I know Jen said we had over 400 people who had asked for the link. You know, the only individual I didn't want to get it was Howard Barron, and I see Howard here. So good to see you, Howard. Expecting you. Yeah, I expect you'll keep us all honest here today. So I appreciate that. Well, again, thanks for inviting MSBO and our membership to this event today as well. We all try to do a pretty good job of keeping our members informed and keeping it at a level where it's understandable. And I know this last couple of weeks, certainly there's been a lot going on the last month. Not only are we still dealing with all the federal funds that have come through, now here we're in the throes of really pulling apart the school aid budget and trying to figure out what this really means to schools. So we're going to take it slow, but from a higher level here today. And I'm sure we're going to have questions. We'll do our best to answer those. I'm going to tell you right now, some of them don't have answers yet. I can assure you, and I'll flag a few areas for you. But for the most part, the budget is what the budget is. And it came in right at the deadline on June 30. They went all night long, and I think it was actually signed maybe July 1. But needless to say, we did find ourselves with a school aid fund budget, which is great. But as you know, and if you're at an ISD, you certainly understand it, our projections of our budgets and where they have to be in the public eye and the timing of this probably didn't incorporate everything that we're going to talk about due to the fact that some things were pretty new within that last week or two of session. So the budgets that you may have already passed, in some respects, yeah, they're probably good on the expense side. You know what you're going to spend the money on. But on the revenue side, there may be some things that have changed since you actually passed that at the board level and implemented that. So again, this year, more than most, I think we're going to see adjustments to the budgets that you initially passed, maybe in some areas more significant than other years that we're familiar with. But needless to say, all good things are happening. If you go back to where we talked about the governor's budget months ago, back in February, and some of her proposals, if you take a look at that framework and then look at what ended up happening at the final budget, it's pretty similar. I mean, I talked to several groups saying, well, here's the big deal. It's foundation, it's at-risk funding, and it's special education. Those are three core areas that I think the governor came out of off the blocks with back in February. And throughout the budget discussion, those are the ones that really held up. And we did see improvements in funding in each one of those areas. Some other things that originally came out with retention and incentive bonuses and so forth, certainly that did take place, but not as it was proposed way back in February, where probably you heard, oh, staff may get a quote unquote bonus or payment for being here this year, next year, and the following. Those didn't really hold and make it to the finish line, which, you know, good, bad, or indifferent, it just didn't happen. However, Jen will talk a little bit more later about the incentives that did make it through and may attract some students into this field of study, as well as maybe even do some things to get that next generation of not only educators, but also those on the business side back into our business. So easy stuff. First, foundation allowance across the board increased of $450 to the foundation allowance. That was a big move the year before to get everybody to a specific level. The foundation allowance coming this 22-23 year is $9,150 per pupil. Very, very strong move in the right direction. $450 increase once again, and we'll be seeing those when we start our first payment in October of the 22-23 school year. A great move overall, about $610 million increase in the funding of the foundation allowance. So certainly a positive. I think we are all, you know, at the end of the day, boards and believe me, business managers alike, we're trying to be conservative as possible going into the budget without overshooting the foundation allowances that we had heard already. Once you see the governor's proposal, the House proposal, the Senate proposal, they were all different and they had different components in the foundation. But at the end of the day, it came out at a real good number of $450. And I think folks were happy to see that. And it probably made your budget, to be honest with you, which is always good. At risk. At risk was another thing the governor originally said, hey, we've got to fund at risk. I mean, it's a great program. We've expanded it over the years. It is being funded. We've increased funding over the years, but the general person doesn't understand. At-risk funding has been prorated for pretty much ever. And currently, if I just checked the state aid update this morning, it is still being prorated for what I'll call last school year at about 76%. So you're only getting 76% of what you should. So in the new budget for 22-23, at-risk funding is fully funded. There won't be a proration of funding for at-risk. So again, a program that has been tried, true, vetted, implemented, making great strides in changes over the years, really impacting students in a positive way. Now it's fully funded. So that's a great thing. Again, that was about 223 million, I believe, to fund that at-risk increase, or I should say it is no longer going to have the proration, and that's a good thing. For districts that might be out there that were limited to a percentage, that is no longer in place. You will be able to get your full allocation. That ends up to be about $1,052 per identified student. So two things of very good news: foundation allowance and the at-risk finally being fully funded. Another area that the governor put on the table was special education. And we looked at a lot of different scenarios of this over the last few months, and truly, how do you make inroads on funding special education? In the last few days, and it was almost a surprise to some that at the end of the budget cycle, there was a major change in the funding of special education services. And I'll be very honest with you, we're still trying to sort it out to figure out exactly how this is going to impact your district and or your ISD. So granted, there are estimates, and I highlight that word, and I'm going to quote it, and I'm going to put it in red. There have been estimates of the changes in special education funding at the district by district and ISD by ISD level. Those have been put out by Senate Fiscal and House Fiscal. If you hear anything today, note those are estimates that we have not been able to actually reconcile. So there's some formula issues that overall need to really be hammered out and understood. And between the House Fiscal, the Senate Fiscal, and even the State Budget Office, I think there's a little bit of interpretation that needs to be settled on how to calculate the change. Again, what's the idea? The idea is for year one of a 2-year phase-in, that year one of this, which would be 22-23, a district would receive foundation allowance at 75% of the minimum foundation or target foundation per special ed FTE. Plus, you would also receive reimbursed costs that maybe you don't already, or maybe you're getting reimbursed but not foundation. This plan provides both foundation and reimbursement for special ed costs. So it's a significant change from where we have been, where generally speaking, it was you were either getting foundation for special education services because you were FTE in your cost, or you were getting cost reimbursement because the FTE dollar amount was not over the 28% that the Durant settlement brought. So bottom line, I like bottom lines. It is an increase of about 300, maybe a little more than $312 million in funding for special ed. What does that mean to you at a district level? I don't want you to use those estimates yet until we get the calculation down and there's some agreement between the Senate Fiscal, House Fiscal, and the State Budget Office that comes together and says, this is how we are interpreting how this calculation is going to affect individual districts. But at the end of the day, we're now looking at both foundation and reimbursed costs for special ed. The way it is written in the language, there is a section that says you are not going to gain less revenues than you had last year, which would be 21-22. However, once again, we've got a long way to go to understanding the calculation itself. So take it with a grain of salt. But at the end of the day, the way it's written, there shouldn't be any district that has less funding than they had last year. But again, the debate, I came off a phone call this morning with what I consider to be the best minds in special education funding from the school business side, and we're still sorting it out. So please hold on. Don't jump to any conclusions of what that estimate looks like for your district. I guarantee you when it is settled, everyone will get the information out to the memberships, whether that be MASB, MASA, MSBO, or the others. Needless to say, another good move, increase in funding in special education. So what does that mean? Does that mean actually more special ed services? Yeah, possibly, but again, statewide, we are funding special education costs through the use of general education dollars due to the fact that we just don't have as much money in special ed to cover all the costs. So again, this may free up some of the general fund dollars that we currently use to supplement special ed. But again, all great steps in the right direction. And I'm seeing the chat jump up here, but I'm not slowing down. Jen, if I need to slow down and grab one, let me know, would you please?
Yeah, before you change subjects, the question is, will special ed increase be long-term and ongoing? Otherwise, don't we run into maintenance of effort issues?
Well, very good question. The way that it is, the way that's written is that there would be increased funding, at least for the next 2 years based on what the intent is. Certainly, it's always a risk when you're putting funds into special education and on the opposite side of that, districts are increasing their expense side. Maintenance effort is calculated based on budgeted amounts, and it's based on expense side accounting. So the key here is, it is always a consideration for maintenance of effort as we move forward. And it is something that I'm certain is on the minds of Michigan Department of Ed as they are the ones who not only check that, but end up being the ultimate responsibility. So yes, again, funding of special ed is different than special ed expenses. And, you say, well, how can that be? Well, due to the fact that we are funding special ed costs through the use of general funds, in some respects, this may free up some general funds to do something else with, because you're now getting those funds through special education. Again, as that sorts out, we certainly will bring that to the attention of the department, and I'm certain that the school management lobby also brings that to the attention of the legislature. Maintenance effort is something that is always on our mind when we talk about special education funding and expense, so I appreciate that. Another area that is enhanced is the Great Start Readiness program. And there was additional dollars put in to the program, about 34 million, that is going to kind of keep the level of consistency between the foundation allowance for K-12 and GSRP. So a full day program would be funded at $91.50 as the normal, what we're calling the target foundation, and partial day programs at the $45.75 or half of that target foundation. So again, good increases on that end. We've seen in the past where they've established a dollar amount in the bill, and it didn't always match up with where the target or minimum foundation was, but they've been somewhat consistent the last few years. So certainly Great Start Readiness program, if you're operating one or you're enjoying the benefits of one, the revenues should be able to enhance your program locally. Another area that we always look at, there's kind of the big 3 or 4, probably the 4th big one we look at is Mipsers in our retirement obligation and what's happening within the Mipsers system. We've got a couple of interesting things that are happening here. We're going to talk about one later that I guarantee you, if I haven't seen them already, we're going to have multiple questions about returning to work. So let's hold the phone on that. We'll talk about that at the end of the session today. But let's talk about the increase in funding for Mipsers. Certainly, there's a normal cost that would require some additional revenues coming out of school aid fund into the retirement system. And that's a couple $100 million. However, the legislature has put in place $1.2 billion into the system. That's an excellent way to start knocking down the liability, which is terrific. And it's also, the good part about it, it's also taking a look at the growth assumptions and maybe how quickly or maybe not so quickly our payrolls change within schools, and then being able to set rates off of one of those assumptions being what is the payroll going to be for the coming years. 2 big assumptions they use is the rate of return that they receive from market gains in the investment side of the retirement. The other side is how fast, or maybe not how fast, the salaries grow in the overall system. And in years past, you have to look at the retirement system as a long game. This isn't a 4 or 5 year look. This is truly a long-term look at a system when they're going in the ratings and so forth. The key here is that in order to buy down, if you will, the assumptions, meaning that we think that the assumption of payroll might not be as high as projected, which right now it's at 2.5%. That means that statewide in the system that they expect all salaries that are reportable for retirement purposes to go up 2.5%. If that is not met, then the assumptions aren't met and it impacts rates down the road. What they're doing is segregating out a little bit of this funding so that they can reduce that assumption to a more conservative level of 1.75% increase in salary statewide. Needless to say, these are all estimates, they're assumptions. There's nothing in stone on these other than to say, if we would like to change the assumption, it will cost the system money. That's part and parcel why we're seeing some of the inflow of funds to Mipsers. Good, bad, or indifferent, depending on where you stand on the general Mipsers situation and how it is being structured and funded. That really doesn't matter. The good thing is that structural changes like this, although they do take revenues away from school aid fund, they certainly do shore up, if you will, the pension system and the healthcare system for retirees. And that's something that we definitely want to watch as we go forward. One of the maybe two more things on budget, and I'll pass it back to Jen for maybe more detail on some of the teacher side incentives and others. The ISD operations were provided an increase in this budget. When the governor came out with her initial budget, there were a lot of 5% increases or thereabouts. Section 81 was one of those, and it did withstand the debates of the legislature, so increased funding for operational side of the ISDs through Section 81. That was about $76 million. Again, I've worked at both locals and ISDs, and when I was at a local, I didn't understand what an ISD did for me until I went to the ISD. The more money the ISD has, the better that trickles down to the K-12 level. And I know we can debate that from now until the cows come in, but from personal experience, that's what I believe. So good news for the ISDs as well. I always throw in a little bit about the use of school aid fund dollars. And in this budget, we're seeing nearly $800 million of school aid fund dollars going to community colleges and universities. So some of our funds being what I'll call removed out of the K-12 zone and brought up to higher ed. Now, this isn't anything new. This has been going on for 12, 13 years. And it is what it is, as my mom says. But it's $800 million. And if I were to say to you, hey, per your pupil, per the K-12 pupils in the state of Michigan, there is $569 going to community colleges and universities of what we at one time considered to be K-12 dollars. So it's not a debate and an argument of community college, universities, and K-12s. It's simply keeping score of where the money goes. And I think at the end of the budget cycle, I always like to take a look at that and, you know, it partially in my mind say, gee, if we weren't giving them money, then we could sustain another $569 worth of foundation allowance increase. Needless to say, it is what it is, but I like to keep that out in front of people just so they remember when you see the lottery, this is a good one. And then I'm turning to Jen because I'll get going. When you see a lottery commercial and they show the kindergarten classroom and they show a lot of nice things in K-12, $800 million of school aid is going to universities and community colleges. That's nearly all of the allocation that comes in the school aid fund from the Michigan Lottery. So as my mom watches TV and sees the kindergarten classroom and reading going on a lottery commercial, I have to remind her that, Mom, that's true, and they are a revenue source. But most of those funds, or an amount that's somewhat equal to those funds, is going to community colleges and universities. So let's not mix that up. Don't stop playing lottery. Don't get me wrong here. Let's just follow the ball and make sure that we as educators and folks who are in charge of monitoring funds that come in and out, that we really do understand that although it is a fund source that we enjoy, it has also created the ability to shift some of those over to other areas of the budget that may or may not need it. And in this case, community college and higher ed. So Jen, I'm going to turn it back to you before I put my shoe in too far in my mouth on that one. But again, don't stop playing lotto. Just know where the money goes.
There is one question. Will the additional funding to reduce the UAL run through us like it did in 2017, 2018?
It appears the way that it is generally structured is that you are going to see the funds coming through the district, and those will be going to the retirement system. Does that reduce your liability? The answer is no. The district is still at a 20.96% level of UAL funding. Now, if we look long term, that may buy down that rate years out, meaning that maybe the liability will get to a point that we can drop down from that. But that does not change our responsibility of 20.96%. So I guess the answer is no, it doesn't change your district liability that you will pay on payroll, although overall it should help the system in the long run by buying down that UAL over time. Okay, Jen, back to you.
All right. So just to cover some of the other sections that are a little more word heavy than number heavy, there were two sections added dealing with consolidation and infrastructure. And one of them is a consolidation and infrastructure fund. This is new to the state budget. The idea that they would put any money toward infrastructure is new to Michigan. We are one of only 7 states, as you know, that does not put state money towards school buildings. So this establishes $475 million into this fund. $5 million of that is for grants to districts and ISDs to look at consolidation feasibility studies. And then the rest is available for consolidation and infrastructure pieces. Only half of that can be used for infrastructure that is not related to consolidation. But it's still a step in the right direction. It's money we've never seen before. And hopefully, as we go forward, we can continue to build on this idea that schools need state support in order to update their buildings. The other piece, 11Y, is the infrastructure study. I see there's a question about who's going to do it. We don't know at this point about who's going to actually run the infrastructure study. But in order to qualify for the money under the Consolidation Infrastructure Fund, you will have to take part in the infrastructure study. That study is supposed to be done to see, with our buildings across the state, what can be done, the most effective way to update them, or do they need to be rebuilt? So this money is available to districts that own their buildings, yes. It's not going to be to update a leased building. It's going to be a building that you own that needs updates and for safety and health reasons. The cost of the study be covered through funding. Yes, that's in here. It's $20 million for that statewide study. And as far as the 50-50, I'm not sure exactly how that works. The way the language is written is you apply for the grant. We'll have to see how the grant language comes through. There's always a lag between the budget and the MDE getting things in place to allow the grants. So it's not something that we're going to know right away today, but we will know as we go forward. I don't know, again, with the 11Y study on infrastructure, since we don't even know who's doing it, we don't know how long it will take to complete. We'll have to find out, one step at a time. We got to get the people who are doing it first, and they will probably have a timeline at that point. But this is only 1 year money, so the $20 million only exists for this year to get that study done. School safety grants was a big win for us this year. We have been pushing and pushing for the money to be allocated on a per pupil basis to be spent in the way that you deem necessary for your district. We wanted to stay away from the millions of contractors and vendors out there that say they can help you and they can make your school the safest, and let you allow. Do you want an SRO? Do you want to do a study? Do you want hardening of doors, hardening of windows? That you get to decide what the best use of that money is. And we were successful in getting that language in the budget. So it is $168 million, and it will be distributed on a per pupil basis to public and non-public schools. That's why there is general fund money in it as well. So the school aid fund money will go to public, the general fund money will go to the non-publics. But to use it for things like coordinating with law enforcement on your drills, or on what they think you could do better for your building, for training staff on threat assessments, for doing a threat assessment, training staff on crisis communication. And there's a list in the bill for these different things you can use it for, but it is not inclusive. It is these things, but then there are other things that you can use it for as well when you apply for the grant to show we're using this money to make the building safer. So we're pretty excited that not only did we get a decent amount of money in that, I mean, the appropriation before was 10 million. So with the 168, we will be able to do more. Will it do everything? Probably not. But the ability for you to spend it as you deem necessary is huge, because that is not how this language started. The ISD is getting safety funds. I believe it is all districts. But again, you'll have to go through the grant process. We don't have the per pupil for safety allocation yet. You can do some quick back of the napkin math to try to figure that out. And we don't know how they will be distributed yet. Again, we got to wait for MDE to create that process because this is new. Teacher workforce incentives. There is a slew of new sections aimed at the educator shortage. And so they're basically sections 27A through 27F, and they each do a different thing. So 27A establishes the Future Educator Fellowship Program. And this is a scholarship for students who are going to be educators to help pay for their undergrad. And then with that, there is a student teaching stipend as well, so that while you're a student teaching, you will also be paid. You'll receive this stipend to help cover costs, because we know that students who want to go into student teaching, who want to go into teaching, they now have to pay tuition and living expenses to student teach. That makes it really hard for people to go to areas where they're not from. It's easier to go home, and then you're learning, your experiences are the same things you had when you were in school. So we're trying to offset some of that with these grants, so that a student teacher would receive a stipend to help cover tuition, help cover living expenses, and hopefully open that pool of student teachers to more districts across the state. There's also two different funds to fund the fellowship. There's a private fund and a public fund, and those are aimed at private or public universities, depending on where the student is attending. And then there is $155 million for grow your own programs. And this was something we've heard from districts that use it, how beneficial it is, but figuring out who those students are in your district that may want to be teachers or may be really good teachers. And it's sort of a CTE program for teachers. It allows you to give them some experience and then be able to bring them back into your district to hire them once they're done with their schooling. So this will allow grow your own programs to expand throughout the state. The student teacher stipends flow through the universities and not the local districts. Because it is a tuition reimbursement or a tuition payment, that does go through the universities to help offset the tuition costs. It doesn't go to the local districts. And I believe the student teaching stipend is the same. There are a bunch of mental health sections as well. One new, mostly old, that they went into. 310 was the grant that allowed you to hire mental health professionals for your schools, that you would get 100% the first year, 66% the second year, 33% the third year, and then the fourth year, it is fully on your budget. Our intent when we pitched this idea a couple years ago to the governor was that this is a sustainability issue, and it would allow districts to work the salary of these people into their budget versus throwing them at them right away. So she did include that in last year's budget. However, there are dates in it that were problematic. This year, the dates have been extended. However, for teachers you hire between March 1 of 2022 and March 1 of 2023, you will get 100%. Or 66%. Be hired between 23 and 24, you get 33%. And then the program ends. They did not put any new money into this line item, so they're only going off the money that was appropriated last year to continue to put it out to grants to districts. Part of the problem we had with spending that money last year, as many of you know, is these professionals were not wandering the streets looking for jobs. There is a shortage in our mental health professionals, same as there is in any other system out there. So we had pushed for those dates to get removed so that as you can find someone that you want to hire, you would still be able to take advantage of the grant. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. This will be a conversation we're going to start right again in the fall with the governor's office to try to get more flexibility in when you hire that person to make sure that this program is doing what we had hoped it would. 31N is part of that Medicaid drawdown when you hire your mental health professionals, and funding for that was increased. And then 31AA is a new section, and this would allow a per pupil allotment to districts for mental health professionals or services, tools that you may need. And again, this has to be established by MDE before we know exactly how much you'll be getting and how that will be allocated. But it is done, it is supposed to be done on a per pupil basis with some flexibility in how you spend those dollars and how you need to address those issues within your district. If you were awarded 31-0 and 21-22, yes, you stay on the track you're on. The 21-22 people, you got 100% then, 22-23, you'll get 66, 23-24, you'll get 33. So if you already have a professional in that pipeline, that will stay. It's just if you hire new after March 1 of 2023, you're only going to get 66%, 33%, 66 after 2022. So they've sort of made they've made somewhat of a mess of it and explaining it. But if you are already in the system, yes, you keep following that. And as you bring new ones in, it just depends on your hire date, how much of the state grant you'll be able to take advantage of. 31AA, the way it is written, it is for what you need in your district. So I would think it would be available for existing staff, but again, some of these details we don't have answers to specifically because we still have to wait on the final grant applications from MDE. It was asked earlier about transportation grants. Those were not included. There was a rural transportation grant that was put forth by the House. There was talk of an overall transportation categorical in the Senate, but none of that made it through. We did just get results from the School Finance Research Collaborative, like a follow-up study on transportation costs and how we should fund them. So hopefully that study will help feed into this conversation that is not done just because it's not in the budget. I think it's a conversation that will continue. And figuring out how best to do that, how best to reimburse districts, and how much money we need in that fund. So the conversations continue, but no, there's no money for transportation specifically in this budget. And finally, the other thing that is not included in this budget is the transgender athlete language. If you remember, the House put in language that said you would have to forfeit all of your state funding if you did not pass a policy stating that gendered boys would not be allowed to play on girls' teams. We alerted all the powers that be and anyone that would listen. This puts you in a position where you had to pick between losing all of your state funding for not passing the policy or passing the policy and losing your federal money under Title IX. We finally got through to somebody. The language was removed. I would expect this conversation comes back up because it's being done on a national level, but at least for now, it is not a budget item. And that was our biggest thing is if you want to have this conversation, let's have that conversation, but not in the confines of the budget and with such a huge penalty on districts. So that language was removed in conference committee. And I'm going to turn it to Deshandria for a highlight out of the MDE budget.
Hi, everyone. Within the MDE budget, there was $150,000 allocated for school board training reimbursement. So as you know, MASB has been approved provider for school board training. So underneath the criteria, there are certain classes that can be reimbursed up to $100. So I know there is a couple of school finance classes, OMA, a few legal courses. So we were excited to see that included in the budget as well. I know last year it started October of 2021. There was initial funding, so that funding has continued. And so thank you all who have turned your paperwork over to MDE for reimbursement. And just to let you guys know that funding will be continued. So please continue to, enjoy our classes and also turn over your paperwork to MDE. Thank you. I'll turn it back to you, Jen.
I'm going to go over to Bob to talk about House Bill 4375, which many of you know is a critical shortage with getting rid of the critical shortage list and retirement bill. It is sitting on the governor's desk right now, and I'm going to let Bob talk about it more.
Hey, wait a minute. I want to go back to that training thing. Can't MSBO jump on that? Come on now.
Yeah,
Good job.
you can
Good.
you can submit to be a vendor.
You
Go
have
ahead.
to submit. I mean, so
I
far there are only
know,
2
I'm
vendors,
just-
actually. I'm actually surprised. There's only 2. So
Yeah, I saw the memo, but we knew our friends across the hall could maybe even do a better job. Thanks, Jen and Deshandria. 4375. Now, this is the bill that would change the returning to work for a school retiree. And we can talk a little bit about the current rules or what the rules have been. It's probably more important to understand what the rules may be when this is, if and when this is signed. And I think all of us expect this to be signed into law. It would be nice if we get this over with sooner and later. But again, this really changes our ability at the school district level to bring back folks who may be the best people to be in front of students and or transition folks who are new to the business with training by allowing them to come back to work. So here's the nuts and bolts of it. The retiree would have to have a bona fide retirement, which means they have an agreement, they sever from the school district. It's a 30-day sever period. And they also have no predetermined agreement to come back in any way, shape, or form. It's always questionable on the ORS side if an individual is leaving and can prove that it is actually a separation and there's no intent to come back. And you know the situations as well as I do. Hopefully that is a test that ORS applies to every one of these, and we have to go into it knowing that it will maintain. The good thing is this, is that some of the constraints of what we've had in the past will be eliminated. So if you are a retiree and you retire and you have a separation and it's bona fide and everybody's happy with it, you have a new period of sit out of 9 months. It is not 30 days, it's 9 months. So this would put in play a 9-month separation, and then you can come back to the district virtually unrestricted. And when I say that, I mean no 1/3 salary earnings limit. There is no critical shortage list, that's eliminated. The unfunded liability that the districts now pay on a retiree's wages are eliminated. And this truly puts back in play that we could bring back folks after 9 months of separation that could come back into the district and help in whatever manner we choose. This is not limited to a specific type of employee, meaning teacher, business manager, superintendent. This is everybody. This doesn't mean that the individual has to be employed directly by the district. They can be a third party employed. They can be a contracted individual. So this really opens up the door for us and allows for us to use retirees in many different areas of our business, whether that's sub-teaching, whether that's business management, whether that's in the classroom or anywhere else in the district after that 9-month sit-out. So the question has always been, well, what kind of impact does this have on our retirement system? And that's a fair question. The 9 months was an agreed upon or a determined time frame between ORS and the actuaries that put together all the actuarial assumptions and rating of the system. And they felt that they have data to suggest that a 9-month separation will not impact the retirement system in a negative manner to the extent that they need to worry about it. And that's why the 9 months is there and not 30 days. So there is another bill that went along with this one that says we're going to report back to the legislature some statistics on how many people left, how many came back, what's the real impact on the system. So there's kind of a twofold thing happening here. But what I'm telling you is things that we have worked toward for the last several years are all kind of coming through this bill in a positive manner to tap into the retirees workforce and truly benefit the district, not only from possibly bringing back someone that you just can't find that professional out there looking for a job, or you've hired a new person that needs 6 months or maybe a year of assistance in getting them up to speed on the job. This will allow for it. I know it's, some people say, well, this is great, I like it, but 9 months, well, that's, unfortunately, that's where we are in the agreement, and that's what's in the bill, and that's what's been passed. Outside of that, there's not much to talk about, except for the fact that this is something I think that has been needed and should really help districts with some of the areas that we have found really no professionals out there. And I know there are some folks that are sitting out there. I can see all the questions popping up. Let me go ahead, Jen. I was going to say, let me just jump into a FAQ. So I'm currently a retiree. I went back to my district after 35 days, and I am employed by that, but I'm already retired. What's this mean to me? You're grandfathered into this. So that means that when the rule goes in, when the governor signs it and becomes law, it will grandfather those in under the new standards. So that means that you may be in a situation where you are limited at the 1/3. You won't necessarily be at that point if and when this gets signed by the governor. The effective date of this, I believe, would go back to July 1, correct, Jen? It was, I believe, passed with immediate effect. It's just waiting for a signature.
Right, but the immediate effect, I believe, is upon signature. So the latest this goes into effect would be Monday.
Gotcha. All right, we'll get some more detail on that to be sure. The question out there right now is, are folks that may have retired June 30? What does this mean for them? Do they have to wait 90 days or 9 months? And the answer to that is yes. Regardless, you're going to fall under these new rules because you have that 30-day sit out anyway. The other thing I should mention is that this does take away the ability for the retiree to recalculate their retirement based on the wages and or time they come back under this agreement. So you're kind of frozen at what you retire on. You can come back and work for a reporting unit 9 months after separation, and truly without limitation of time or earnings. And so needless to say, I think it's something we've talked about for a while, and it is sort of come true. And once that signature hits it, it certainly will be there. I don't know if I hit all the questions there or not. I'm going to jump back.
Let me look. I think you got most of them. Question about if people have retired but are back to work, are they old or new rules? And you mentioned they'll be grandfathered.
Correct. And there is one about compensation. You are still drawing your health care and you're still drawing your pension, and you're back in the district working, making whatever wage it is that you're going back to make. So you don't pause your pension to go back to a district and work at whatever rate you determine or is contracted. So you do not lose pension, you do not lose health care.
And would this be a conflict of interest for retirees serving as school board members? We have one of these every time I do a show. This is a Brad question. But it may, if you go back to work in the district where you were serving as a school board member, you will probably fall under the same conflict of interest rules that you do now. But that is definitely a Brad question for clarification. And one of these days, I'm going to make them just hang out during one of these while I answer questions.
Probably not a bad idea. Are there any other questions about this? I mean, honestly, when you take a look at it, it somewhat removes all the issues that we have had in the past about coming back to work for a school district. What was that last one I just saw?
So there's two others. Can retirees in their 9-month window still coach?
I guess if you are deemed an employee of the district at that time, then the answer would be no. I think that might be something that we could look a little bit more deeply into. But my understanding, if you're at a reporting unit and being paid through payroll, and it's a Mipsers reportable wage, then the answer would be no, you have to have separation.
And then what contract will retired employees work under? If the teacher, then is it the collective bargaining agreement?
It's a good Brad question.
Yep. So we'll collect these, we'll pass them on to Brad because I know there are some details that we'll still want to know. I'm sure Brad has not looked at this yet because it's not been signed, but we will definitely flag it for him. Are there any other questions on retirement or anything that we missed? All right, so there's a budget question. Are budget dollars, in particular the per pupil increase, tied to particular language or outcomes as in the past? So the per pupil foundation has not been tied to particular outcomes. It was other language within the budget. So some of the ESSER funds were tied to how, if you were in person or not. Some of the best practices money was tied to whether or not you fulfilled the best practices. So the per pupil allowance itself is what you get. When you start talking about the other categoricals and the other specific money, like the mental health per pupil is going to be tied to whether or not you're using it for mental health money. The school safety per pupil, again, if you're tying it to school safety, but your per pupil allowance, that 91, wherever we ended up, 9150, that's not with strings attached. That's you follow all the laws just like you do with anything else with your foundation allowance. It's the individual categoricals where you start to run into pieces that you only get the money if. Asking Bob, as a clarification, a business director left June 30th. That person cannot come back after 30 days to help train the new person under the retirement. Is that correct?
Well, because that law is not in effect yet, then you have a 30-day window right now. If the governor signs it and you're not through your 30 days, then yeah, the 9 months is my understanding. You will sit out 9 months.
There's a note too about summer school programming. There is some money for before and after school programs and summer programming that is in this budget. And I think I have it. 25 million of the federal relief funds is being used for before and after school programs and summer school programming. but it does deal with community-based organizations and nonprofit entities and things that you would have to contract with.
Okay, Jen, I think we need to clarify something here.
Okay.
If it's all the 1/3 stuff. Under
Right.
the new rules, when and if the governor signs this bill, there is no 1/3 restriction. I don't care when you retired. There's a 9-month sit out. So if you retired 2 years ago and you waited your 30 days to come back and do whatever it was in the district, you're going to get grandfathered in because you were prior to what this law was. So there is, for anyone moving forward, there is no 1/3 limitation. There is no specific critical shortage list. It's any one of the positions within the district. There's no UAL paid on those retiree wages, but the retiree cannot recalculate their retirement or take the time as additional compensated time for retirement purposes. So this is more simple than I think what you think it is. It means if you are already retired and have returned to the district, then you are subject to the 30 days not going back, and you will be grandfathered in. If you are just newly retired, June 30, we're kind of in that odd spot here where we're waiting for the governor to sign it. If that goes into law before your 30 days is up, I believe that you will be subject to the 9-month wait out period.
I was sent a question, if somebody retired 2 years ago, but has not returned to a district, does that count as their 9 months?
I think we'd have to check on that, Jen, but my understanding would, yeah, because you have a separation and you've had that sit out.
And can they come back as a consultant if that is now their business?
I believe that in that arrangement, they would be considered, yes, they could do that because they could be employed by the district independently or through a third-party contractor under this. Again, after 9 months of them sitting out. Or if they've already been out, then they would be grandfathered in.
So then on benchmark reporting, there's a question about, is there a tie bar between 2 times per year on benchmark reporting requirements and the foundation allowance? Again, there is no tie bar to the foundation allowance. You will receive that per pupil. There is benchmark funding, and that is tied to you shall give a benchmark test within 9 weeks of the first day of school and before the last day of school. And the money in that is set aside for implementations of a benchmark system, and there's $11.5 million there. So if you want access to that $11.5 million, you have to do the at least 2 times a year benchmark tests. And then MDE is going to report, or is required to report to the legislature the results of those benchmarks by September 25th of next year.
Jen, there's a question about reporting retirees, and the answer, my understanding is yes. You don't have to track every retiree and see if they've gone to work somewhere, but if they've come to work for you, then you are reporting that to ORS. So it wouldn't be anything different than having an employee in place and reporting those to Office of Retirement Services. Again, folks, we're getting into a lot of technical weed areas here, and as these things get signed into law, and I want to make an overall comment, and Jen's done a great job of it so far. Everything that we're talking about that has something to do with an application process or the department or Treasury, because Treasury is listed in the bill under some of these sections as the responsible party. They have not determined within the department what areas will be covering some of these sections. So when we start asking questions about, well, when's the application for this new section available? I asked this morning, I emailed MDE to ask specifically. I knew we'd get questions about this. And what they have said is, number one, patience is a virtue. Any non-state aid release section in statute requires MDE to follow detailed process to initiate, develop, and implement the section. A big area of this is the application process, and if the application is in one of the many or multiple electronic systems. So this is what I've been told before, and I've been told again this morning. This is an 8-week process at minimum for MDE and or Treasury to come up with an application process and the ability to program that so that folks at the district can actually get on one of the systems and apply for the funding. 8 weeks. So she signed the budget earlier in the week, or was this last week? And now I'm sure internally at the department and also Treasury, they're discussing who is going to be responsible for these areas. So although we'd love to say, go to this system, the application's due by, August 30th, and you can start this next school year right off the blocks, that's just not the reality of how this works. So we do need to take a little bit of time and sit back and work with them through this. And I've offered our services at MSBO if they need individuals to give feedback or vet things, we're all ears to do that. So again, Jen did a great job of saying that throughout her presentation, but I think we're at that point where there is more new sections in this bill than I think I've seen in 12 years, 14 years. So the deal is there's a lot of that back work that's going to happen at MD before we as organizations are able to give you this specific detail. And that holds true somewhat in the retirement as well. As we get more time with ORS, they won't start answering these detailed questions until the governor signs it. So as soon as they sign and they have to implement, they'll have more answers and probably FAQs on it.
Are there any other questions? We're at about an hour, so we don't want to take too much of your lunch hour or too much more than your lunch hour. You've already taken your lunch hour. Just as information, the session for the legislature they're out for the summer right now. They have one day scheduled in August, but we're not sure that that's going to be real. And then they return after Labor Day for a month, and then they leave again in October, and they return after Election Day. This tends to happen every election cycle so that they can be home talking to their constituents before the primary and before the general. Then we hit lame duck starting right after the general election, and that will run until mid-December. However, the Speaker of the House is not a fan of lame duck, and so we do hear rumors that we may not have much of one, if any. There may be different rules he wants to operate under, but the hard part is at the end of the day, when he's getting pressure for things to be done, especially for all of the people who are either term limited or redistricted out of a seat, there may be some pressure to have a lame duck anyway. So we'll see what happens and we'll keep you posted. We will have our next views from the Capitol just before Thanksgiving to let you know what we expect out of a lame duck. So we hope you'll join us then. And a friendly reminder that the primary is less than 2 weeks away, 2 weeks from yesterday. So make sure you have either applied for and received your absentee ballot, or you are ready to go to the polls in 2 weeks. Don't miss that primary, especially with your new districts. You may have a lot of new names on your ballot and different people representing you. And still in many districts, this primary is more important than your general. So make sure you get out there and vote. Thank you all for being here today.